When Rebecca Cooper's husband died suddenly 8 years ago, she admittedly stopped praying. After 39 years of marriage, Rebecca felt alone, consumed by grief and despair, and then she began hearing conversations that changed everything she knew about God. Good to have you with us today, Rebecca, and really quite an amazing story. Honestly, I took a look at some of the material and the headlines from some of the reporting that's been done. I thought, I have never heard anything like this before. So if you could just kind of take us back there and share that moment when things began to change.
Thank you. It started, I think, about 3 days after Charles's service. He died unexpectedly, and felt like thousands of prayers had been sent up on his behalf. And when he died anyway, and my mother died 4 weeks later, it just seemed to me that all those prayers had been ignored, and I was just kind of done. I was done with God. And yet my doorbell rang, and a friend was standing there with pen and paper, and she said, right, it helped me when my husband died, maybe it'll help you. And so somewhere in there, it just kind of began to feel like I was overhearing these conversations in heaven between Charles and God, and I just started scribbling them down. And eventually I thought, well, I may be done with God, but apparently Charles isn't. And over time, they became helpful and insightful, and that's how it started.
Had you journaled before or written before, or was this something that new for you to pick up?
This scope was certainly new. I've always written during my life as a way to process things, or in 5th grade, if you've got 25 spelling words and you're supposed to do sentences, I would do a mystery story about the whole class, that kind of thing. But this was different. This was just a daily, sometimes more than once a day, conversation that it felt like I was hearing, and I would just grab a piece of paper and scribble it down. And at the end of the year, I had scraps of paper everywhere, and when somebody heard about it, it said to me, you know, you need to pull all this together.
And what did that do for you inside? You know, obviously, I think everyone can relate. Going through tragedy like that, sudden loss of your husband unexpectedly, then followed the loss of your mom, you know, kind of that pulling away. How did this process and how did what you were hearing begin to impact your heart? Initially,
I really felt like I'd been hammered. Not only had I lost my husband and my mother, I felt like I'd lost God too. And I was brought up in a Christian family, and so God was a big part of my life. Over time, I don't think I realized it then, but when I look back now, I think these conversations were a way to keep Charles in my life and get God back into my life, and that was very gratifying.
When you had prayed before, had you ever heard God talking to you? So maybe that made these conversations less startling, or was this kind of a new voice that you had heard?
You know, no, I can't say that I had, but I would also add the conversations really weren't startling. I didn't really think that much about them. It just seemed like it would be natural. Charles was a great guy who was always working the room anyway, so for him to be working the room in heaven wasn't that unusual to me. And so just started writing them down, and then I think the more I exercised maybe that muscle, then the more I would either feel like I was hearing or could imagine the conversations that they would continue to have.
And what were some of the content of the things that kind of stuck out and really grabbed your attention?
Well, kind of extremes. I mean, for example, one time Charles is expressing concern to God about, I'm not praying anymore, and I'm not, you know, the same. And God's like, that's all right, I can handle the attitude, you know, that kind of thing.
So Charles was kind of, you felt, conversing about your spiritual condition.
Yes, yeah, at times. But then there were also other times, for example, the day of his service, we're big University of Tennessee volunteer fans, and that happened to be the day of the championship game. And we had a television at his service because Charles wouldn't have had it any other way. Those guys are not going to miss that game. And we lost. LSU won. And so I could just hear this conversation with Charles going, God, just that one time, couldn't you have, you know? And God's like, nope, nope. But negotiating, trying to figure out what the options are. That was Charles.
Well, what I find interesting too is both God and Charles were very interested in a lot of the details of your life, whether it was the fact that you were watching Deal or No Deal on TV or cooking soup that day. They were both very engaged in that.
You are so right, and I think at the time that was comforting for me to realize that I still did have them in my life, whether I really was seeking God or not. God was not going to discard me, and stayed interested and stayed impressed with the pain and the day-to-day living that I was trying to do. When I look back now, again, I really realize more than ever what a blessing it was to feel that they were there with me even during those really dark times.
Rebecca, with regards to an explanation for this, have you been asked and have you given a response? You know, where this came from? Is this something that was initiated through your imagination, you think, or something that you were being able to kind of eavesdrop a little bit, or just God's way of expressing the fact that He's aware of what you're going through and that He's there for you?
I have been asked, and did I really feel like I overheard these conversations? Yeah, I did, at least the core initial. But then, well, could you have imagined? Certainly. And then, well, could you just been crazy? Well, absolutely. But I finally realized the message is the same.
Right.
It was a way to deliver me, I think, from such a place of pain to a place of healing and recovery. And as it turned out, maybe a way to make this book help somebody else, and so to make something good come out of something so bad.
And having gone what you've gone through, how would you counsel or advise someone who's suffering through the grief of a lost loved one?
First of all, just meet somebody where they are, if it's somebody that you care about. Everybody's different. Everybody grieves differently. My cousin lost her husband after I did, and she and I talked about it a lot, and I just said to her, you can't change what happened, but you will change. But you have to give that time, and you have to let people help you. I had so much help from family and friends and church, and they just waited till I needed it. But when I was there and I needed it, the net was there, and I appreciate it.
Did your cousin ever say, well, I'm not hearing any conversations. I'm not hearing a lot of the things that you did. And I'm sure a lot of our viewers probably sit at home saying that too. Do you ever ask yourself, why me? Why did I hear these things when so many others have not?
What I've learned is that everybody kind of deals with grief in a different way. And so I don't think I'm resented that I've wound up being able to process my grief in this way. But I do believe that everybody has a path if you can just open up your mind and your heart and discover it. There is a way to move along to a recovery process, but it certainly takes time and effort.
Yeah. What about things that we shouldn't do when we're grieving? Things that that are not really going to be helpful or healing in the long term?
There's not a lot that I tell people not to do if I'm asked. Obviously things of health and safety are important, but I think the one thing that I would have regretted doing somewhere along the way, I'm an only child, and so in a way my dad lost a son and a wife, even as I lost a husband and a mother. But I watched him model his Christian beliefs on how you deal with things when they don't go your way. And at some point I thought, my kids and grandkids are watching me. I want to be sure I model for them what you do. And so I would not want to regret the example that I set for somebody.
Yeah. One last question. We've got just a moment left. What was the most surprising thing that you heard in your conversations?
I think it was probably the willingness for God to engage with Charles And I know with Charles's personality, it's no surprise to me that he would make the effort. But I love the way that the two of them brought a message together, which was both spiritual and human at the same time.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Rebecca Cooper. The book is Hey God, Yes Charles. And if you'd like to connect with Rebecca, you can go to heygodyescharles.com, or as always, go to our website, harvest-tv.com, for an easy link to get over to her site. Coming up later, your prayer requests. But first, we're going to hear from Brian Bush with the latest news regarding Turkey's incursion into Syria. We'll be right back.